Joe Biden, the president of America, has pardoned thousands of ganja users that is in prison. Him just stick a pen and just write that and just write it off, expunge them. You can believe that? You know what I'm saying? The pen is mightier than the sword. This is one of them. Joe Biden gave thousands of prisoners who did in the ganja them freedom. Yes. So we're going to play this clip here. I want you to listen to this carefully and see how Jamaica, may I tell you why, if them youth here, they don't really know where the Jamaican artists do with their music and where the music do when it go out there. I mean, I exclude myself because I know where the music do when we go out there with certain people and hear what them say. If them could only know and use that medium for really do something to make where them do become part of where we are going to play here so now. That are artists in Jamaica, music can spread so much that it's out there. So we're going to play this clip here from MSNBC. Listen.
And more vicious, more deadly, even than these soul-destroying drugs, is the menace of marijuana.
Marijuana use, harmful as it is in its own right, is often a prelude to the use of cocaine and other drugs.
I have to tell you, I think the problem is not that we're sending innocent people to jail in large numbers. We're not sending enough of the criminals to jail.
This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Remember that Reagan era ad? Any questions? Yeah, a few questions. Do all drugs fry the brain like an egg equally? If opioids are more addictive than pot, why are they treated so much more leniently? Is it because opioids are used more by white people? And lawmakers who take donations from big corporations let those corporations make billions of dollars off the opioids? And if pot is so bad, why do so many wealthy people and white people get away with using it without ever having any criminal legal problems, while poor and minorities are charged at higher rates? Well, those are just some questions. There are actually answers. We are also, when possible, in the answers business here in the news. But the answers are disturbing. Consider that it was the disgraced Watergate president, Richard Nixon, who first led the pot crackdown in this country, and for suspicious reasons. Nixon's top aide later admitted their war on drugs targeted Nixon's two political enemies, quote, the anti-war left and black people. His words. He went on to explain, we knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and criminalizing both heavily, Nixon's aide explained they could disrupt those communities, arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news. How about that? If you're watching on the East Coast, it's the early evening. Hi there, this is the evening news. But we're not falling into that trap. We're going to follow the facts. It is, of course, illegal for the government to abuse criminal laws to target politicians' opponents or legislate based on their lies. And that's what that Nixon drug war was about. That same aide admitted after the fact. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Yeah, that's history, but it's also news tonight. It was Nixon who created the DEA. It was Nixon who put marijuana among the most dangerous drugs, that same Schedule I list that Biden is now asking be reconsidered by the federal government. And some policies age poorly as we learn more or as times change. But other policies were broken from the start, and that is the war on drugs, according to its own creators, like the Nixon aide I just quoted you. Then later administrations, first led by Republicans, pushed even farther. Reagan made the drug war a centerpiece of his domestic policy and his sort of American vision. And crime did rise in the 80s, and there was violence linked to hard drugs and gangs. Let's be clear about that legal history, but the effort to equate pot to heroin and push jail as the answer to all drug and health problems did not work. And then you had the moderate Democrats like Bill Clinton who started to echo part of that initially conservative Nixon-Reagan agenda. Some of the most controversial, harsh laws on the books today were pushed not only by Nixon initially, as I showed you, but by then Judiciary Chairman Biden and then President Clinton, who you know are both Democrats. So now you have Washington, D.C. considering more reforms. And as a matter of the way seniority works and politics work, you have politicians who are now in their 70s or even 80s who are considering dismantling part of the laws that they themselves passed when they were in their 40s and 50s. So it is worth knowing tonight how we got here.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
Marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug in the United States.
All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs.
It's time to take our communities back from the drug traffickers and the drug abusers.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it. And didn't inhale, and never tried it again.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
All right. Marijuana is not factually the most dangerous drug today, nor was it when Ronald Reagan said that, nor was it when Bill Clinton kept echoing Republican talking points about it. Now, people are allowed to change their minds. That's actually often a good thing. Many people say it's an essential quality for long-term leadership. And Biden's move, which clears all federal charges for pot possession since the 70s, does show a change of position. It dismantles part of this bipartisan drug war that he waged. But this is not over. That is what I want everyone to understand tonight. This war continues at the state level, where again, in both parties, governors are overseeing prisons with not 5 or 10 or 15,000, no, 40,000 people still in prison right now for these marijuana-related convictions. And so while it's tempting to view this as some sort of problem that's automatically fading into the past, that view also depends on where you sit and on whether you are forced by police and prosecutors and judges to think about this, whether you are separated from your family for the pot use you may have practiced or practiced a long time ago, or whether you are walking around checking yes on a criminal record every time you apply for anything for something from 30 years back, because if you are wealthy, connected, high class, or white, it is very unlikely that you have to think about that. Police, though, are still obsessed over scoring pot arrests above those more dangerous drugs we mentioned. So even as I showed you, almost half the nation has legalized pot. Right now in America, we have this war continuing. Consider that in the data we have from typical recent years, half of all types of drug arrests, almost half, 40% marijuana. And those aren't related to dealing or violence. 90% of those pot arrests, as you see on the right, 92% were for possession, which is personal use. Now, who's getting arrested? I mentioned it's not the political candidates who admit their use in public. It's not the bankers dabbling in recreational fun at some rave or party. Police arrest Black Americans at 4 times the rate, and data shows pot use is actually the same across these groups. Those are numbers. Now, what are numbers made of? Well, this kind of data comes back to people. Can we face any of the people who make up those numbers? Let's pick one tonight, and I admit we're just picking one, so it's in essence arbitrary, but I just showed you how many types of cases there are like this. So let me tell you briefly about Corey Ladd. He was convicted of possessing half an ounce of pot. That's, if you've never been anywhere near pot, that's an amount you might see displayed in a group setting, a party, or a concert. Ladd was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison without parole. And as you see, it's not some super old story. That was 2011. There are thousands of stories like that, some less severe, some also galling in what they do to people. So as longtime career politicians dismantle part of the wreckage they cause, This is a time tonight, as we end this week with this big news, to note who was actually also right about from the start. And I say that objectively, factually, not scoring any points here, but interestingly, while Nixon was targeting those so-called progressive hippies and the radical civil rights leaders, so-called radical, and the people calling for peace and love and less harsh punishment, they were actually more or less right about this in a way that has become so mainstream, it's now getting its bipartisan embrace. And then you have the artists, and they may have popularized or shared a more jovial version embracing pot use. But it is interesting to note that where Washington is headed is where some of those artists were pushing their informed view for a long time about the pot policy trade-offs. I bet you a lot of people recognize that there on the evening news tonight. That's one of the most iconic statements about pot prohibition policies of all time. Peter Tosh's classic, legalize it. Let's listen to what he said. Legalize it. Yeah, that's the best thing you can do. Doctors smoke it, nurses smoke it, judges smoke it, even the lawyer too. Fact check, true. In a lot of states in America, now legally, a lot of places around the world, a lot of different people use it, just not everyone gets in the same trouble for it. So now you have President Biden basically decriminalizing all past federal possession offenses and pushing to potentially take pot off that harsh Schedule I list. So I say with no hint of exaggeration, after his long career, President Biden may be approaching the Peter Tosh phase of his approach to prohibition policies. And let me tell you, that is a long ways from the Clintonian crackdown. And people can debate whether that involves growth, evolution, leading from behind, as so many others in our society have taken the culture, the politics, the conversation, society to this point. But if you notice, sometimes on this program, we cover prohibition policies a lot and the war on drugs a lot. There's a reason for that. It goes all the way back to Nixon. It is linked to the attempted criminalization and suppression of certain voices. It has a failed history. It is one of the enduring problems in American life and certainly in our criminal justice system. Mr. Biden took his Peter Tosh step, but what comes next really matters.
Coming out of MSNBC about the removal of charges of thousands of ganja smokers done by the President of America, Joe Biden, a man who used to rant and rage against it. You know, we must remember these things and say, no, I mean, I'm what? 80s, somewhere around there. Him decide now, say, when did I say, him come realize your foolishness. Yet still, Peter Tosh, a little Rasta man from Jamaica, did attack to them forever. You can just imagine that. Now Peter Tosh's name is big in America again. Well, I tell you, jackass, the world will live little Peter Tosh name big in America again because of what him said years ago before a whole heap of one who listen to this program did ban. Peter Tosh sing that tune and it become an anthem to ganja smokers all over the world. Never find another ganja tune like that, even though you have, me have 3 albums with pure ganja tune upon the 3 of them. I think a 4 another box set, a ganja box set, I think a Trojan box set. Pure ganja music upon it. So you must know, so there's enough ganja, when you see that tune there when you legalize it, is the anthem for all ones who come out of the closet with them drug habit, who them used to call drugs, like Nixon, who was held. Remember, them find him guilty, Watergate, remember that Watergate thing? For those of you too young for to know about Watergate, Google Watergate, you understand? It's a serious, serious thing. And we're going to say it again, and we're going to say it 1,000,001 times, you know. What else was the Rastaman saying that will come to pass? What else was the Rastaman saying that will come to pass and become what we call mainstream? Because them can't call a cult again, you know. We're not a cult. You understand? You have to go look somewhere else for cult. I think 2 weeks ago, I tell the people, them say, me go to jail for ganja, me no smoke ganja, me never have it for me when them hold me. And at 20 years it take for them expunge it, take it off of my record. And all me know say, me did have it for my record is because me go to Canada. I think the first time I go to Canada, and them say me have to get police record. When I go there, me hear say me have a ganja charge. And it did there for 20 years. 20 years it did there. Before them take it off of my record. Terrible thing, terrible, terrible.